Hello and welcome to this live stream. In this particular live stream, I'm gonna go into the King Archetype and the need for its return, and in that sense, yes, very much a reboot of the masculine that is needed within modern society. I think, as many are aware, there's generally, when it comes to, well, I guess you could call it the gender dynamics, and also kind of like the, I guess, associations made with the masculine and the feminine in particular. There seems to be very much distortion within the culture where it's leading more into the sense of fantasy, or I don't know, detachment, where it's not as integrated. I mean, it's not for sure not the case for all people, and there's definitely many people there that do embody this in a good manner, for sure. It's mainly about those instances that do exist where this is not embodied well. And I want to go very much deeper into the King Archetype, specifically because, well, the King Archetype is not an archetype that's very prevalent within modern society, for many obvious reasons. I mean, we're not a monarchy anymore. But the archetypal energy itself is something that we can embody. I'm gonna, talk about the masculine, side regarding this, the sovereign archetype. And before I'm gonna, go deeper into that and very much into the Proto-Indo-European base of the King Archetype, and the deeper layers, and what is all connected to that from a Proto-Indo-European lens. I want to go a little bit into, well, what it's generally associated with. So to give you all a little bit of a quick overview of what is the King Archetype. There's a shadow side to it, very much like a manipulative shadow king or a tyrant. It very much links to unintegrated instinct, leading to overwhelm, and then creating this need for control and domination, and to very much try to control external factors, because the internal factors, the internal world is too chaotic. So one has to, so one starts to cling onto those things and try to control things and dominate things, in the sense of that otherwise, it becomes too overwhelming, and often this is being like projected outwardly onto both the feminine, but also, the nature as symbols of the unconscious. Nature and the feminine as symbol of the other for the masculine archetypes. So I mean, that's at least one thing, and symbolically the feminine for men being associated with vulnerability, but it's very much more linked to their own emotional vulnerability. We're gonna go a little bit deeper into the King Archetype, because there's very much something important to point out when it comes to the King Archetype as well, regarding this sense of vulnerability and this sense of being able to be emotional without feeling, overly vulnerable, or I don't know, maybe it's like more along the lines of being vulnerable while being secure at the same time. But, can go a little bit deeper into that as well, and really like what sparked this impromptu live stream is very much some realizations that I've been having myself lately. been working on a lot of unconscious trauma kind of related stuff, and kind of realized, by integrating the anima, so the feminine aspect of the psyche from a Jungian lens, and this, what some people would be talking about it with regards to like the inner child, or like the more, I guess, vulnerable aspects of the psyche. Very much, I don't know, that it's very nice and all, and it's important to integrate these archetypes and these aspects of oneself. But at the same time, there's a real need for the king archetype for when it comes to the masculine, and the king archetype in its proper integrated form, and not the shadow form. Hence, I want to go deeper into that, the different things associated with the king archetype in its integrated form, before diving deeper into the mythology and very much, what is linked to that in the deeper mythological layer, and some of the rituals from a Proto-Indo-European lens. But yes, let's head right in. We know the first quality that the king archetype very much also is associated with would be authority and leadership, obviously. And the king archetype is marked by a strong sense of authority and leadership. And kings are seen as natural leaders who inspire respect and admiration from their subjects. And they possess a commanding presence and the ability to make decisions for, the greater good. And that's very much important when it comes to that. And often there is like, a wise old man figure, such as like a figure like Merlin for like King Arthur, but also Merlin for the various knights, that very much is like this guiding figure, Merlin being linked to both the magician archetype, and I have a video on that in the archetype playlist on my channel, and also very much the self. And I'm gonna go a little bit deeper still into that in this particular video, but it's important to to note that that it's an integral part of that regarding the greater good, the self archetype, and king archetype, being linked to the self as an archetype as well, and the self being the center of the psyche that represents wholeness. But coming back to the king archetype, another one would be responsibility, and the king archetype is also a symbol of the weight of responsibility that the king has for their kingdom or community, and they are accountable for the well-being and prosperity of their people. And this archetype emphasizes, the need for a ruler who is willing to put the needs of their subjects above their personal interests. The next one would be wisdom and judgment, and been preparing some notes for this just a little bit beforehand to have a bit of a overview. So wisdom and judgment. Kings, are expected to possess wisdom and sound judgment, and often, like I said, a figure like Merlin or another like wise old man figure is this counsel, or another symbol of the self, and they're very much expected to make decisions based on a deep understanding of their subjects and the ability to weigh different perspectives. And their wisdom often comes from life experience and a connection to their inner selves. And with that, really, there being, the connection, like I said, to the wise old man, but also the self in various forms. and it's symbolically within mythology, but also the different stories, what that represents. Hence King Arthur, for instance, and Merlin being inherently linked as characters. If one would lose one or the other, it would not be as powerful as a combination. It's the combination that makes things proper. The next one would be justice and fairness, which is connected to the king archetype as well. And that's because, kings are responsible for upholding the law, resolving conflicts, and ensuring that their decisions are just and equitable. And, they are expected to be, impartial and unbiased in their judgments. And that very much also requires a lot of self-awareness from a more Jungian but also psychological lens. It's not just about being able to know others, but it's really about knowing yourself, to know how you work and how you think, so that then through this self-knowledge you can start to see things more clearly. But this very much requires a lot of inner work to be able to see these patterns. Both within yourself, but also in others. And that's also, very much linked to, things such as, like, for instance, Plato's cave, for instance, is a good example as well. To be able to, see past the shadows and to see things for what they really are. And the next one, I would say, very much is an important one, linked to that regarding the emotions, for instance, because it's also linked to protection and security, and kings are seen as protectors of their people, and they provide safety and security both physically and emotionally. And this archetype also represents a paternal or nurturing aspect, ensuring the well-being and prosperity of the kingdom. There's this like kind of sense of the within the feminine, with the archetype, and very much this connection to the emotional side, and being able to be vulnerable and emotional, and that's all good and very important. But at the same time, it's good to have this other side to balance things out, so that then it can feel more secure. So it's a secure sense of vulnerability, both physically and emotionally. And then finally the last two would be generosity and benevolence, and longevity and legacy. And generosity and benevolence, it's very much about being willing to share one's wealth and resources with one's subjects, ensuring that the kingdom thrives. And it's very much about putting the welfare of the people above one's own interests. But there's a balance there to be found as well, regarding one's own sovereignty, and one's own kingdom in that sense, and one's own kingdom in a personal sense would be the sphere of people around oneself. It's not about bossing them around, but it's kind of realizing, with this influence that one represents, and the kind of what one's actions can do and affect upon people, that one very much is aware of that and strives to work towards the general welfare of those that are around one, instead of like with the Shadow King, for instance, becoming very self-centered. And you can think with that like in the realm of like narcissism and those kind of things. And we have a very good video, the first one from season 1 on that, regarding narcissists and grifters. But I think very much that it links to the Shadow King and being kind of, in that sense, possessed by this aspect. But then at the same time, there's also one important thing to note, that for those, for instance, that went through, for instance, narcissistic abuse, or they went through other things that led to low self-worth, there can be similarly just core beliefs connected to very much this king archetype, or like a similar archetype within oneself that is then rejected because it's been associated with the shadow side solely, and just the whole thing gets rejected. So you don't want anything to do with it, and it's very much about in that case about like reclaiming that. And I think generally there's enough people that went through this kind of these traumatic experiences and went through this, and very much can benefit a lot from integrating this archetype, and to very much work towards that, because it's very much not it's very much an entire process regarding that. And we're going to go into that just in a bit, what it links to in a more like Proto-Indo-European sense, and it's a very important sense, and a very important thing to keep in mind, because there's these things associated with that, with kings and such, but there's a deeper mythological layer to it that's very often overlooked and not acknowledged, and it's actually the most important factor in what makes a king a king. What makes someone who is sovereign, and that's true for a good king in the past, but it's also true for us as individuals when we embody this sense of sovereignty and this sense of wholeness that comes with it. And now still coming to longevity and legacy, the king also, symbolizes continuity and the preservation of tradition, and also representing, with that stability and the passing down of wisdom from one generation to the next. And to some degree, if one would take like a Jung to live by approach, which is this one Jungian channel that has some interesting insights, but they would probably link this to like genome, or the genome, DNA, and those kind of things. Mythological lens, one would link this to the ancestors very much. And I have a good video on that from a shamanic, animistic perspective as well. That one should check out regarding that from like an Asiatic lens. It's pretty interesting. But symbolically like that, it links to that. But it's not about having to. It's not about that tradition needs to become this stifling dead force. It's something that evolves, and there's different stories regarding that. One could talk about, for instance, the story of Seth, Osiris, and Horus, and for that matter, very much as well, where when it becomes too stifling and too dead, to deadening the traditional sense, that it becomes too rigid, then it very much turns into a king of the underworld, and with that, very much it connects to this this leading to this tyranny of the past, but also the overwhelm from the unconscious as well. Because the thing is, once things get too rigid, and we build up this mental tower, or the societal tower, and things become too rigid, then the unconscious gets eventually repressed, because it can't have this deep language with what it can speak. It's like, for instance, with Merlin and King Arthur, like where Merlin eventually got trapped in a tree or a cave and then was lost, waking up in a tower, this rigid tower, and that's very much that, when it gets repressed, and Merlin being the wise old man, and with that the self, it's when symbols can't speak anymore. It's being forced into particular forms, particular ways of how it has to be, instead of it being able to come up. And it's very much about striking a balance between both, like, that what is new, so with Horus, the divine child, and his father Osiris, that what is old, and to find that balance, hence him giving the one eye to his father, because things change, and one cannot cling on to the past, to some old sense of what was. It's like, it's important to learn from the past and to not just throw out the baby with the bathwater, but it's very much about, about finding the right balance between that. So one can, through this inner work, what one can do to get to the king archetype and the full authentic expression of oneself, be able to lift the baby out of the bathtub before we throw away the dirty water. And that takes work, and it takes a lot of care, because you have to it's to sift through that which is vulnerable, to very much lift the potential of oneself out of the shadow, out of that what is repressed, and to how one would talk about it in alchemy, to in the albedo stage of alchemy, separate the impurities from that what is that is to be purified, and which can be transformed later on. So there's this, in the Citrinita's phase, this transformation happening where lead is slowly turned into gold, and then leading to the full expression of the self, and that also being linked to the king archetype very much as this full expression. And that's what I want to go in next, which is the king as a symbol of wholeness. And in that matter, the king, in a Proto-Indo-European sense, is this symbol of wholeness. I'm gonna give up a few examples from Proto-Indo-European mythology, but there's also from Egyptian mythology. There's something I want to bring up as well before diving deeper into Proto-Indo-European mythology again. But, for instance, in Celtic society, the Celts believed in the unity of king and land, and they further believed that when a king was wounded, this unity was disturbed, and he had to be replaced by a new king to ensure the prosperity of the land. And this can also be seen in the story of Nuadu, the king of the Tuatha Danann, who had to be replaced on the throne by Bress after losing one of his arms in battle. And, when he finally obtained a new hand made of silver, he could return to the throne and replace Bress, who was a weak and mean ruler. And, the health and well-being of the king was also, a symbol of the prosperity of the whole land for the Celtic people. And, there's also a parallel with the main king regarding the Knights of the Round Table as well, who have to find the Grail and heal the maimed king in order to restore the prosperity of their land. And, the Holy Grail, but, also the symbolism that is inherent in that regarding the older Celtic tradition with this kind of horn of plenty symbolism, the cauldron that provides sustenance. That very much links to the anima, and with that also to the Earth Mother, and we can still go a little bit deeper into that in a bit. But what I really do want to point out with that, which both Nuadu and Bress, for instance, but also other figures, is this very important link, with the king symbolizing wholeness as an archetype of the self. The archetype of the self is linked to this. And the archetype of the self is the totality of the psyche. And, from a Jungian lens, what we can see here, which, Nuadu and Bress, for instance, but, also similar figures from different mythologies as well, is that when one, loses a part of the self, something happens to it, like, think trauma or think, just regular circumstances of life, then one starts to lose connection to the self and this authentic expression. And, this needs to be restored to get to this authentic expression. So one is, able to very much reconnect to the self. And the totality of who one is in an authentic sense. And this very much, requires one to, like I said, to dive, to lift the baby out of the bathwater. And it's very much about diving into the shadow, diving into the underworld, and to bring these different aspects of oneself back up. And myself, for instance, I've been, doing that with a lot of like active imagination and shamanic journeying, but there's different ways of doing this. Journaling and like dream analysis can be helpful too, and there's rituals that one can do, and it very depends on like what one is comfortable with and like how that would look like for one. But the point is very much clear that one is to bring these different parts together to actually be able to to be authentically oneself. But then what comes into that also is that one once one has rescued all these different parts, of oneself, it's still like this necessary step to still embrace the king archetype in of itself. Because there's gonna be this struggle between the shadow trying to lure one back into the old patterns and trying to lure these things back into this sense where things are not whole, where it's very much about facing that, about facing the shadow. But also very much working on transforming that what is in the shadow. To transform that what is has been hurt or lost in some for whatever reason, really, to bring that back, because it's often within the shadow that these particular things become distorted, or like, you know, they are seen in a particular light, and then one really has to one really has to discern and be like, well, wait, actually this thing might actually be this, like, you know, the shadow side of this archetype. It's like, you know, for instance, I had in the past, for instance, a lot regarding the Shadow King, noticing it and just being like, no, I don't want anything to do with you, because I associated, you know, the King archetype in that sense, or like, you know, that what's associated with that regarding like power and influence and these kind of things, very much with, well, the stuff from the past, very much, you know, and it comes very much into like, you know, just very much like, you know, think like, to give an example, narcissistic childhood, for instance, where that happens. And that's the whole thing, where, you know, then this kind of archetype within oneself gets pushed aside, where the vulnerable parts of oneself gets very much neglected and invalidated. But, you know, the important thing to notice that, you know, it is exactly the King archetype which is the antidote to very much this, to reclaim one's power as an individual. And, you know, that's why, you know, the King archetype is so important. But, you know, one can't fully embody this in a grounded manner until one, you know, has retained this sense of unity within oneself. And with that, symbolically also a connection to the land, you know, and as an archetype of the self, you know, it gets to the point where there's not really a distinction anymore between, you know, you as a separate individual and the land and the people around oneself, where they start to become all very much part of oneself in some sense. It's like there's no actual distinction, because we're kind of, well, we're part of like, you know, everything around us. It's like whatever we do affects everything else. And, you know, everything is in that sense interconnected. Even though, like, how, you know, so many would act as if that is not the case, as if, you know, that's not true, but it is. You know, whatever we do to, for instance, nature, will fall back onto ourselves. And I very much like this Fortress of Luke video regarding that as well, where he went into that into this idea as well, and very much also linking this to the feminine and the ability to hold, you know, political power that the feminine had in you know, the Indo-European tradition in the original sense. We know, and within that tradition, the sovereignty of a kingdom, you know, ultimately rests with the woman. And, you know, in the most ancient times, the king was seen as a representative of, you know, or an embodiment of the god of heaven, and his wife, you know, the goddess of the earth. You know, you have this symbolism throughout different traditions. One of which would be, for instance, in the Thracian tradition as well, where this is symbolized. But, you know, there's a lot of this symbolism too in for instance, Anatolia, but, you know, also within Egypt. So it's kind of like it goes beyond that. I mean, even like with Lao Tzu and you know, the idea of yin and yang. There's a lot of this kind of symbolism in that as well. You know, the shadow and the shadow and light, earth and heaven, and these all coming together. You know, and that's very much a symbol of the self as well. You know, this coming together of opposites. You know, and that was further, you know, like how Fortress of Luke also pointed out. You know. Symbolized through marriage, and, you know, that comes into the sacred marriage ceremony, which we, you know, had a round table talk on just a while ago, and I don't want to go too deep anymore into that. So you should very much check that video out. But it's an important part to get to the king archetype for men. I mean, and the queen archetype for women. But I want to keep it to the masculine. But coming to the sense of the land also, what he pointed out, and that's that this marriage, the sacred marriage, that is this union of opposites. It can't be the oppression of the feminine, or in that extent the land, because if held through violence and fear, it would just be ruined through constant strife. And power can only be properly manifested by harmonious balance between the masculine and the feminine, sky and earth, light and dark, and without this, the land and people would come to ruin. That's what he pointed out, and that's exactly right. It's through these opposites coming together, leading to this wholeness of the self, and with that, the emerging from of the king archetype, leading from the divine child through the hero to the king archetype. This unfolding of that, because the divine child is a symbol of the self as well, as much as the hero archetype is. And the king archetype as well. And these are these different stages of development where the divine child gets born through, these attempts at the integration of the shadow, where then it goes to this slow growth and shifting to the hero archetype, and eventually culminating in the king archetype, which, is this final powerful symbol of the self, in which all of these opposites come together for the man, and it's also symbolized by this this union, again, being between the king and the queen, the heaven and earth. But also, when it comes to that, with the divine child and the hero archetype, the whole process of integrating the shadow, and getting to that point of the birth of the divine child, and the potential is very much done through the sifting through the muddy waters of the unconscious, of everything that's been repressed. That the muddy waters representing the shadow and the repressed contents, and to rescue these different aspects of oneself. But also face that which is destructive within oneself, and very much try to integrate that. And in a Proto-Indo-European lens, very much, it links to the Koryos rituals, and we already did with what I call the King talk back then, which is this Age of Gemini talk, that we had done quite a while ago. It very much links to that, but also that regarding the Koryos and Arctea, a video that more recently came out as well, which is a continuation of that kind of that same thought. And regarding the Koryos rituals, it was very much about embodying the wolf warrior, and the wolf warrior being linked to the wolf, independence, and the instinctual side, and it's very much regarding these rituals about integrating that into oneself. It's much like how Aragorn was first a ranger and was first in the wild, and it's this stems from the older Koryos tradition, where the young man first had to go into the wild, they had to go through these rituals till they faced the darkness, they faced the unknown, they had to face that which is dangerous, and through that start to work on very much integrating the instinctual side of oneself. So the instinctual side then does not come up and over, doesn't overtake one anymore. It's not leading you towards different things and controlling you in that sense. But at the same time, it's not about trying to instead try to control the instinctual side, because that's the it's the wrong approach, because that's just not gonna work very well. It's gonna backfire in the end, and it's very much about instead integrating the shadow, so the instinctual side becomes an integrated and conscious part of oneself, and it's through doing that, these different rituals that they did, that then they would work on that, and this would facilitate that. And it was part of the rites of passage that they had in the past, and a very important part of that. But it would after that sense of being in the wild and having to face these things, also being this submerging into the collective unconscious, into through the ancestors symbolically, and it's to become symbolically one's ancestors. That's how they did that in these rituals, so that then symbolically the boyhood ego can die and be reborn. And they did this, through these rituals also, linked, for instance, to something like the Wild Hunt, where, Wotan or Odin was, would be leading that. And it's this leading back of the Koryos warriors back into society. And this, this submerging into the collective unconscious. But there's also one thing important to point out with that, with the Koryos rituals. It's also very much about breaking free from the feminine, in some sense. The maternal feminine that becomes too possessive. But it's not about rejecting the feminine either, because it's this period of breaking free from it is a necessary step for the masculine ego to develop itself. But it then is important to return, because if one does not return and one stays in this eternal sense of the hero archetype, one will not progress, and eventually it will lead to hubris, and it will lead to a lot of problems, and one can end up building this sense of a tower, and then suddenly things go all bad. And it's not that there's anything wrong with the hero archetype either. It's an important archetype for going into the shadow, to rescue these different parts of oneself. But then there is this need for the integration of the anima from a Jungian lens too, the feminine, and that what is considered to be vulnerable for many men. And it's through the anima that these different aspects can be actually integrated and start to become part of the self. And the anima symbolically, kind of holds that, she's a symbol of not just the feminine, but also it's connected to life force as well, and can, withhold life force or give it back. And very much symbolically is the source of vitality in that sense as well. but not just vitality. The instinctual side is connected to that as well, but the anima very much is connected to that as well, as this guide between consciousness and unconsciousness. And for instance, in Celtic mythology, but also different Indo-European mythology, there's this sense of the anima being able to withhold the waters of the unconscious, these vital waters, and to decide, be like, nah, Brad, like we're not gonna give you any more juice with that. We're not gonna give you any more like vital energy, because you've been going against the self, but it's going against your own authentic expression. So in that sense, it's a good thing. But what's also important to note is that there are complexes connected to different core beliefs as well that can, for instance, come up in different ways and steal vitality, and this is very much linked to trauma and a lot of these connected things as well. So it's important to note that there's a lot of discernment necessary to figure those kind of things out. But the anima very much is an important factor in all of that. Hence, there needs to be this coming together of the king archetype, but also the masculine and the feminine for this to work, for there to be a king archetype. It's also in that sense very much from an Egyptian mythological lens, also this connection between like Horus and as the self, as the counselor of the pharaoh as well. And symbolically, it's the pharaoh, listening to Horus being the symbol of the self. So to the self, the inner voice, and one's own authentic expression, and to listen to that, and to not waver from one's true authentic expression, to become aware of that. To not, give away one's power in that sense. It's not about dominating others. That becomes again like Shadow King archetype territory. But it's about like finding the right boundaries, the right way how to approach things. Where one can be sovereign while also thinking about the prosperity of the whole. That reflects also back to the inner whole as well. It's the sense of, for myself, it's the round table concept that I used in regarding like integrating these different aspects of myself. Because it takes away this kind of sense of that one aspect is more important than another, or even that you are more important as ego consciousness than any of the other aspects, even though it's important to still embody the king archetype and not let these different aspects completely take over, that one starts to, because it's important that they remain in an equal relationship within oneself, symbolically speaking. And I do that a lot through like active imagination, and I have a video on that as well that you can check out regarding active imagination and shamanic journeying. It's like an example of one of the journeys that I've done, but I've done quite many similar ones like that, where I've been facing these different aspects. But yeah, that's an important part of that, to lead to this sense of wholeness, through become aware of that what is in the shadow, the baby in the bathwater, to be able to separate the dirty bathwater from and the baby, to lift the baby out of it carefully through this careful process of sifting through everything what's in the shadow, and actually see what's its proper healthy form, to transform this, bring these different aspects together. And then finally, by embracing the hero archetype, and then finally like working on that and nurturing that and then getting to the point where one can then start to embody the king archetype more and more within one's own life, to work on setting these boundaries. I mean, one can do that already and from the very start, but it's also, it's a learning curve, very much. And there's definitely going to be times when the shadow is going to come up and try to tempt you back into old ways of being, or be like, oh, looky here, like we should go interact with this person, or we should do this or that, or oh, maybe have you thought about booze? We were drinking booze in the past, or something like that. That's some random examples, but it's to, I don't know. It's just about like having this self-awareness to be like, actually no, that's not an authentic expression of myself. That's actually me, the shadow trying to tempt me back into old crap that I actually should not go back into, because it's gonna lead me away from my authentic expression. But it's not about judging the shadow either, and coming there with this sense of judgment as well, because most of the time, very much it's just because of past things that it's more comfortable to do these things because of like the different aspects, and it takes a lot of courage to integrate these different aspects and to allow them to be there and allow them to be present. And with it comes a lot of vulnerability, and it can be quite overwhelming. I can speak from experience regarding that. But then at the same time, it's important to integrate the king archetype again. So the masculine can be more balanced. So it very much leads to, in that sense, a reboot of the masculine, and this more integrated form of it that encapsulates both like the more like warrior side, but also the more vulnerable side as well of being a man, the logical and the emotional, and these different opposites. And that's very much that's very much key when it comes to that. And that's regarding these things very much an important, very important factor, and it's to reintegrate these different parts to become whole, to be authentic, and to have these boundaries. And it's gonna take one way out of one's comfort zone, and it's one thing that I've very much learned too. It's like you have to constantly push one's boundaries bit by bit. It's like you don't want to overwhelm yourself or like get to the point that you end up re-traumatizing oneself, because that's just not gonna lead to anything good. It's about figuring out the incremental steps to be like, okay, I can push my boundaries to this limit, and then I go push it to that limit, and then slowly you expand them. It's like with the Koryos rituals that I've been like reenacting and deeper in the woods here. It's starting off more simple, and then pushing it further. Eventually, pushing it to the limit of doing these things in the dark, and then eventually, and finding the right, the right like balance between comfort and being uncomfortable. And to face these different things, like face the dark, face the unknown, face death, face face these different things, to become. Well, it's not about not being afraid, but it's about being allowing yourself to feel fear without it being overwhelming. Because the thing is that fear, but also different emotions, they have an important message. So it's very much important to allow that to be there. Because if we don't allow that and we start to like push that away, then the king archetype is not whole again, and then we start at scratch again. We have to then regain. Like Bress losing his arm in battle, he has to find a new one, a replacement. The handmaid of silver, in the case of this particular story. But similarly, it's the case with us. These different aspects that we have to then find back. And when it comes to that, it very much is a continual effort as well, because life is messy, and there's always going to be something that's going to fall into the stream of the self. This you can see it much like a river, where there's the shit happens, and then suddenly a rock falls into the river and it blocks the river to some degree, or it creates problems. And then you have to work on taking the rock out again, and to work on that and reintegrate different aspects. That's a continual maintenance. But with a lot of awareness, it's possible. It's very much possible. And this awareness can be, cultivated over time, and it takes time. It takes years to very much cultivate this, and it takes. I would say it also takes the integration of the trickster archetype as well, and I have a good video on the trickster archetype too. Not in the sense of being a trickster, but in the sense of that the trickster archetype helps one to be able to face the unconscious in an unconventional manner, in that sense, and it can balance out the hero archetype too. Keeps one a bit more, takes things a little less serious, balances out the king archetype later on too, and the magician archetype as well. And generally, it's helpful to approach it in that way at times, because then you can approach something but kind of like flip the script and suddenly be like, actually, for instance, there's some complex or like this different archetype in the shadow that's there. You can then start to flip things around and see through the trickery of the shadow that's sometimes there, where it appears a certain way, but it's actually not that way. It reminds me of a particular example where I was facing a particular aspect of myself that was pretending to be very frightening and very scary, and look how scary I am. But really, it was just an aspect of myself that was frightened and did not want to be reintegrated, and was like, nope, we ain't doing that. Get the fuck away. And hence approached or tried to keep me away from reintegrating it, because it was terrified of being reintegrated because of the stuff in the outside world, because of things in the past. But it's very much, then discerning and being to have the wisdom through the trickster archetype, to be able to see through the trick and actually be like, wait, are you actually a part of me that's just messed, or kind of tricking me right now, that I because you don't want to be, because you don't want to unnecessarily just attack an aspect of yourself, because that's not good. I mean, complex is an entire different ball game when it comes to that. But that's still something that I want to point out. And similarly, this discernment, then really helps into cultivating that sense of awareness, and the sense of awareness is needed to be able to integrate these different parts of the self, and to be able to lead to wholeness in a proper manner. So one can start to transform these different aspects of oneself, and through that lead oneself closer to the King Archetype, and with that to the self, the totality of the psyche, which is both consciousness. It's both consciousness and unconsciousness, but also both feminine and masculine. It's the logical and the emotional side, and and very much on that note, I think that's very much what I have to say for this part. I'm hoping to do a part 2 to go a little bit more into maybe some more or less mythological and practical things, maybe with Boomshroom for a part 2 coming up at some point. But until I would say thank you for listening, and see you all next time. And if you're interested, you can hop into the Fox Den. It's you can find it on the main channel page. I'm gonna still put a link in the description, and links to the videos that I talked about as well. I hope I'm not gonna forget one, but if I would, I'm sorry for that one. Just let me know in the comments if I would forget that one. And I hope that this helps a bit with making things a bit more clear regarding the King Archetype, and some of the deeper layers regarding this, how this links to the self, and there being these different stages, and this different more unknown symbology linked to it that goes deeper than that. The Proto-Indo-European mythology goes very, very far back, and very much is at the core of Western civilization, I would say, and very much just is much older than this modern civilization that we have, and hence much more potent to tap into, much more healthy for our European psyche to tap into than a lot of the distorted modern or late Christian kind of way of thinking. Because there is in the first age of the first fish regarding the age of Pisces, there's good things, but things kind of went downhill after a while. But I don't want to go too deep into that one. That would be an entire other rant. But thank you all for listening, and see you all next time. Okay, bye bye.